Good afternoon, friends. We're here today on behalf of the Slate Run Tackle Shop. I'm here with a good friend, Dave Rothrock, and he's going to talk about some common errors that beginning fly anglers may make and some good ways to remedy those errors. So, Dave?
There are two issues that I think are really primary that cause some difficulty for the average fly fisher. And the first one that I'll go over is the fact that people have a tendency to use way too much wrist. One thing I always say is, anytime we play team sports, what we're looking at is we're looking at relying on every member of that team for our performance. If you rely primarily on one member, you don't really have a good season. Well, it's the same thing with fly casting. We have a team available in order to make that good cast, and that team is comprised of wrist, forearm, elbow, upper arm, and shoulder. Once we can get all of those team members involved in this cast, we're really in the game. However, relying upon that one team member for most of our performance, as many people do, causes problems. That team member is the wrist, and that's something we want to do our best to try to avoid. It's not that we go with no wrist, it's that we go with just enough wrist. So that being the case, what happens with so many people, and I'll get this cast started just by lifting everything off the water and presenting it in front of me. What we'll do is, this is a wrist cast. You notice the real big loops. You'll also notice that at some point in time, what I'm doing is probably hitting the water behind me, and I get to the point that I will actually slam this line into the water in the direction that I want to present that fly. If we're working on a rising fish, and obviously this is geared toward fishing that surface fly or dry fly, that's going to probably cause that fish to be put down. So you got to think of the ramifications of what happens by us using too much of that wrist. However, once we then get into a position that we start spreading that work around, what we can do now is look at nice tight loops. You don't see that rounded movement of the rod tip. You see that rod tip traveling in a straight line, and that's pretty much what we want. And that way, when we make that presentation, we've got everything rolling about and having that fly actually going out and everything straightening out above the surface of the water. And that's what our goal should be. And within that is one of the other problems that I see so much, especially when people are fishing bigger water like this. As a fly casting instructor, I got to admit it, I'm always watching casts. And sometimes I see the most beautiful false casts that you'd ever want to observe. And then all of a sudden, that fly caster, that fly fisher goes to present that fly, and everything changes. What changes? It's the position of that rod at the point that we stop our acceleration on the forward cast. If you stop that at the same position that you've stopped it when you're false casting, everything, all of this line will roll out above the surface of the water. But what a lot of people have a tendency to do is when they go to present, they literally continue to move that rod down to the point that it's about parallel with the surface of the water. And what results from that is that line now is actually pointed or directed down. And a lot of times what happens is the end of the fly line slams into the surface of the water, and our leader never even rolls out and straightens out to the point that we can present that fly. And a lot of times the fly caster goes, oh, what happened there? Well, that's what happened. So we need to be consistent. When we consider the stop positions, they have to be considered as well in the presentation of that cast. So let me get this started and I'll demonstrate. If I'm going like this and I've got this cast going like that, I've got everything really going nicely, and I go ahead and do that, that's exactly what happened. Everything slammed into the surface of the water. My leader never rolled out to straighten out to present that fly. And very possibly I've spooked that fish that I've been trying to stalk and present a fly to all of this time. I've invested all this time and effort getting into position, making that cast to the length that I need it in order to present the fly, and in the end, I've ruined it all. So if we go ahead and ensure that we have a good stop position, and it's not so much that the rod actually has to stop moving, it has to stop accelerating. So that when we lower that rod, all we're doing is repositioning it so that we can then, in fact, effectively follow that drift and at the same time respond well to a fish. Also then too, what we want to do is pull that fly slowly to us, perhaps make that roll cast to get it straight out. Now we're in a position to start casting it. And there's our presentation. Everything works out well. I haven't spooked the fish, I haven't made a bad cast, and every once in a while everything comes together and that fish actually takes our fly, which is our ultimate goal.